Most of modern synthesizers have more than one types of synthesis involved. Now, for educational purposes, we will go through all the specific models and types of synthesis. So to start this off, we're going to start with the simplest one. Saying the simplest one because subtractive synthesis refers to subtracting parts of frequencies using a filter from an oscillator. And that's it. So, subtractive, meaning to subtract something from the sound source, from the oscillator. So we talked about the oscillators before. Now let's say we have this sawtooth oscillator. And subtractive would be just adding a filter on top of that and subtracting pieces of frequencies from that oscillator, thus shaping the sound and getting a different timbre or color. So that's what subtractive synthesis is. Quite simple. Now we will get into filters, all the types of filters, how they work. But just knowing that this is the type of synthesis, subtractive, and the first synths actually came out with that. Some of the first synths, of course. Let's say a lot of Moogs and a lot of those actually were subtractive synths. So you had oscillators, in plural, so a couple of oscillators, maybe just one, and then you had a filter on top of that, and that was it. We're not going to even refer to any of the modulators like envelopes and LFOs, but they don't even include that in types of synthesis. So just having this as a concept, having an oscillator and then having a filter to filter out some of the frequencies, some of the frequency spectrum from that oscillator, that would be subtractive synthesis. Now, the next one I'd like to get into would be FM synthesis. Right here we have a synth from Ableton called Operator, and that's an FM synthesizer. Now, this FM synthesizer also has a filter on top of that, so not really just FM. We do have subtractive on top of it. Just having the FM possibility makes it an FM synthesizer. But what is FM? What does it stand for? Well, it's frequency modulation. You will get this concept way better once you know what LFOs are and all those types, different types of modulations. But just to explain that roughly to you, so you know the concept of an FM synthesizer, is that, let's say, I'll turn these off. So we have one oscillator right now, which is a sine wave. Let me play it. Okay, so we have that sine wave. And now if I changed the tune of that sine wave, so if I change the pitch of that sine wave, if I did that really fast, like that, but really, really, really fast. So as fast as another oscillator would oscillate, I would get FM synthesis. So I'm using another oscillator, and we call these operators in an FM synthesizer, which is actually going to, aside of producing sound, it's going to modulate the frequency of the first oscillator or operator. So these oscillators actually affect the pitch of one another. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, I can choose how these are actually connected. Which one modulates which one, and which one does actually produce sound that we hear, or does it just modulate the next operator in line? So the A in this case, the operator A is actually producing sound, and the operator B is only used to modulate the pitch of this one. So let's see what that sounds like actually. You see, if I turn the A off, the operator A off, we have no sound. I'm still sending MIDI messages, but we have no sound since this one does not produce sound. It's only used to modulate this one, to alter a parameter of this oscillator. By modulating the pitch of this oscillator, so I'm modulating nothing, and now I'm modulating. And the speed and the actual frequency, and I would say speed, but the frequency of the operator 2 actually affects how it's modulating operator 1, of course. So let's hear those differences. So you can make crazy, interesting sounds by just doing that, modulating one oscillator with another one. So I'm actually changing the parameter of this one. I'm changing the pitch of this oscillator using this oscillator. So as fast as this one is oscillating up and down, as we would say that, like a sine wave, he's changing the pitch of this one really fast. This is why it sounds so weird. So it's not as if I did that with my hand. So imagine that happening 1,000 times in a second. Quite different. And this is how, actually. So this is FM synthesis in a nutshell for you. Now we have more complex FM synthesizers, like FM8 from Native Instruments, and those also have the same idea behind them. Just like the other one I just showed you, like the operator, this one also has, let me try to initialize the sound, new sound. Okay, so this one also has operators, as you can see, A, B, C, D, E, F, and these operators, just like in the operator, this one has 4, FM8 has 6 of these. They can affect each other. Okay, so as you can see from this matrix, right now we're getting sound from oscillator F. Let's try that out, see what that sounds like. So another sine wave, of course. You can hear it. Okay, but now if I modulate that operator F with any other of these, and I do that by just using this matrix, adding modulation. So this is operator F modulating the operator E, and this is vice versa. Operator E modulating operator F, or operator D modulating operator F, and this is the amount of how much it's modulating it. So I'm going to use the operator E. I'm going to go back to all of these operators and maybe change the pitch of operator E. Now when it's enabled, so you see, changing the frequency of operator E really changes the sound a lot. But we can make all kinds of crazy things. Let's say make operator D modulate operator E, and then operator E modulates operator F. So that's even more different. So let's try that out. Ooh. So we can make all kinds of crazy sounds, and that's without including any filters or anything like that. So this is like pure FM synthesis, where we use one oscillator to modulate the pitch of another oscillator. That's frequency modulation. So we're modulating the frequency of one oscillator using another oscillator. So really fast frequency modulation. We're changing the pitch effectively of an oscillator really fast up and down around the center frequency. Let's go into additive synthesizers. Now this concept of additive synthesis is maybe a bit harder to understand since I can't show you physically all the sine waves included, but let's try with a simple explanation. Now additive synthesis makes sound by emitting a large number of sine waves, or any number of sine waves if we decide. So if we wanted to create this sawtooth, as I've told you before, any complex waveform can be created by just adding a big enough number of sine waves with specific frequencies and phases and amplitudes, and we can recreate any other repetitive waveform, like a square or a sawtooth, anything like that. So as you can see, a sawtooth looks like this. So we have all the harmonics. Remember, that's what I showed you, all the harmonics in the frequency spectrum. And I could demonstrate what that looks like on a spectrum analyzer that you saw before. So let's try that with span, so you can see it. Just a moment. Okay, now. So let's see, what does this sawtooth look like when I play that? So you see all of the harmonics. Let's play a note lower or something. See that? All the harmonics. Let's see the square and let's see what it looks like. Now you see that every odd harmonic, we don't have the even ones. And exactly those are the ones that are missing. So each line right here in this synth is actually a harmonic which can be altered. Its amplitude can be altered, so we get a square wave. Now let's look at this sawtooth again. Let's just look at the first harmonic right here. That's also produced by a single sine wave. I'm going to turn that one off. Like that. So you see it's missing. So let's turn the second one off, just so you see what I mean. So I'm going to zoom this in even more. So I'm going to turn off a specific harmonic, that one. So the second one is going to be missing. Right there, there's supposed to be one. So if I delete this, it's there. Not there anymore. And I can even change the volume of the next couple ones. So you see, I'm shaping the sound of a sawtooth by not using an equalizer or any tool that messes with the spectrum balance of the sound. Actually, I'm actually controlling all the specific sine waves being produced. So each one of these lines represents one sine wave being produced to actually make this sawtooth. And you see, once I change one of those sine waves, their amplitude, the waveform right here changes, since it doesn't stay a sawtooth. So a sawtooth looks like that. All of the harmonics are the same, and those harmonics are actually separate sine waves being produced together to actually create a more complex waveform, like a sawtooth or a square. So now, by emitting a lot of sine waves, I'm getting a sawtooth. And that's additive synthesis for you. So instead of having separate waveforms, all the sounds that we produce using additive synthesis is adding sine waves to a sine wave. Hence the name of the addition, the additive synthesis. So we are just adding sine waves on and on and on to get more complex waveforms. And I can prove that. I can even try with the oscilloscope to show you what it looks like. So let's try this out. Let's see what that looks like. So you can see that's a sawtooth. Now let's try to diminish all of these harmonics, all of them, just like that, all the way down. We'll just leave one, the first one. That's a sine wave. And this one alone, right there, just another sine wave, but with higher frequency. Now if I add these two together, we have two harmonics. This is what it looks like. So I'm getting more complex waveforms by just adding more sine waves. And another one. And then another one. Four of them. So I'm getting closer to a sawtooth, as you can see that. The more I add, getting closer to a sawtooth. Not really complete yet, but the more I add, the closer I get. Now, if I start shutting off each second one, like that, I will be getting closer to a square wave. Let's try that out too. You see that? We do still have some waves in there. But as I gradually add more sine waves that are on every odd spot, and that square wave becomes more and more perfect. So by adding multiple sine waves with different amplitudes and frequencies, we are getting more complex waveforms. This is additive synthesis. Now, next synthesizer and next synthesis principle, actually, I could leave this J-scope on just to show you the looks of the next one. So the next one would be, let's say, Serum, again, that you've seen a lot in lessons past. Now, why Serum? Well, this is a wavetable synthesizer, and it got its name by the type of the oscillator it's using. So it's using wavetable oscillators. What does that mean? Well, you already know that we have those main types of oscillators like a sawtooth, square, sine wave. To get something more complex already in there as a single oscillator, you would have to use something like this, a digital technology. So what I can do is choose amongst hundreds of these digital waveforms. And let's say this is one of them. And I can change through them. So this actual oscillator contains not one waveform, but 256 different waveform shapes. And I can switch through them using this knob, Wavetable Position. So it has 256 positions where the waveform is slightly different, and I can move through those, changing them. So let's hear what that sounds like. You see that? Now let me turn the unison off. Let's see that again. And if you compare this image to the actual oscilloscope, see that? Nice. Let's try another one. And that's basically wavetable synthesis for you. So instead of having, let's say, like in Additive, a lot of sine waves adding up together, or Subtractive, where we actually just have simple waveforms that we subtract frequencies from using filters, that we are going to get more into, of course, in the next lesson. Filters are going to be next. And also frequency modulation, where you modulate the frequency of one oscillator using another one. All of these, and now we have wavetable synths, where you actually have a really complex oscillator that has, instead of just one waveform, has 256 different of those, and you can switch through them seamlessly and get different variations in sound. And by the way, not even having to mention, those waveforms are really complex. Now, the reason I'm finishing this block of the lesson with this synthesizer is because Serum, aside of having that wavetable component to it, it also has a frequency modulation component to it. So I can use the oscillator 2 to frequency modulate oscillator 1. So frequency modulation from oscillator B. As I do that, and to prove it to you, I'm going to move any parameter of this one, and you will see this one changing. So we are not hearing the oscillator B. So as I change any parameter of oscillator B, if I pull this down, I can change as much as I want, since the level of this oscillator going into the mixer, going outside for us to hear, is 0. We're just using this as a means to modulate this oscillator and change its sound. So aside of having Wavetable, it does have frequency modulation synthesis in it. So it has FM synthesis, wavetable synthesis. We also have a filter on top of all of that to actually filter out. So we have subtractive, frequency modulation, and wavetable all in one synthesizer. That's why I told you that synths today don't just contain one type of synthesis. It's all combined in digital technology that's easier to do, so it's all combined to give you better flexibility to create various sounds. Okay, now let's go to the last piece of this lesson, and that's gonna be modular synthesis. Now this is a free open source modular synthesizer. Now what are modular synthesizers? In all the other synthesizers you've seen so far, you already have the elements inside of them, and those elements are interconnected. So let's say you have 3 or 4 or 2 oscillators, 2 filters, all the modulators you need, and they're all interconnected. You can, of course, affect those connections, but they are connected for you already. In a modular synthesizer, you have nothing, and this is what they, in hardware, what they look like. You have rails that you screw on modules onto. So you have to buy a module if you want to, let's say, transmit MIDI to that instrument you have so that you could actually play it with a keyboard, like this one. Now I'm going to create a patch for you quickly, and without too much explanation, because we still haven't learned about filters and modulators. But I will have to, let's say, buy, if this was a hardware modular synthesizer, I would go out and I would buy an oscillator. I would have to buy a filter. I would have to buy each one of those components. So let's say I'll take an oscillator. I'll take an ADSR. Let's say a mixer, amplifier, actually, and maybe a multiplier, so we could get stereo output. Okay, so I'm going to reconnect these, and I'm going to speed up the video for that. Now that it's all connected, I can show you that it works like any other synth. So I have an oscillator, which I can change the frequency of. I have a filter. I have an envelope that you haven't learned anything about yet. The filter is also, but just as a filter, it does exist. I can also change the volume because I have an amplifier, the output. So all of these need to be connected by you. And by creating maybe some other different crazy connections, you can make unlimited number of sounds, modulations, whatever kind of synthesis you needed. So I could input another oscillator right here. Okay, maybe not this one. Let me find something. Yep, something more complex, let's say like this, and maybe exchange. So use this oscillator instead of that one. I can delete this. So I just changed my oscillator into a different type. This is what you would do if you had it in hardware too. You could go out and buy another one. Let's see what it sounds like. As you see, this oscillator has way more waveforms than just that standard typical sawtooth square. It even has some drums. Lots of interesting things are there for you to play with. Some people make it their obsession to buy as many components so they could make a really complex patch. And one of these could actually produce more than just one synthesizer for you, because you can just fill it up with a lot of oscillators, filters, controller units, and just make it into 3 synths or 1 synth. It all depends on the connections you make. That is the only thing that's going to determine what it is. Is it 1 synth, 3 synths? You just use the elements used to make a synthesizer to your liking. So that's what modular synthesis is. Having modules of a synthesizer that you interconnect the way you want to produce a specific result.